She never thought her life could be rewritten in one cruel night, but destiny often arrives dressed in pain. The mansion gates loomed high above her, symbols of power she never asked to face. A car waited with tinted windows, a silent reminder that she was not walking toward freedom, but into a cage wrapped in diamonds. He was there, cold eyes, perfect suit. Every inch the man who could buy the world, yet looked at her as if she were already broken. And with just a single demand, he changed everything. "You will be my wife." Her heart trembled with disbelief. Marriage was supposed to be built on love, not power, not revenge, not chains, disguised as vows. Yet here she was, a young woman with dreams ripped apart, forced to sign away her future in exchange for his empire's unspoken secrets. She wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but the weight of his presence pinned her like gravity itself. The whispers of the guests, the blinding light of the chandeliers, the cold touch of his hand when he slid the ring onto her finger, each moment carved itself into her soul as a wound she thought would never heal. The world saw a glittering wedding. She felt a funeral. But even in the cruelty of that moment, she saw something hidden in his eyes. Behind the walls of his arrogance, there was a flicker of something raw, fragile, almost human. He tried to bury it under smirks and icy commands, but pain has a way of bleeding through. And she wondered if the man she now called husband carried scars deeper than the ones he forced upon her. The days that followed were a battlefield. Their home was not a home, but a palace of silent wars. He demanded loyalty, control, obedience. She gave him defiance, anger, tears. He tried to break her spirit with his coldness. Yet every time she stood tall, it unsettled him. The more she fought, the more he seemed haunted not by her resistance, but by the reflection of himself in her eyes. Nights were the hardest. She would sit by the window, staring at the city lights, wondering if freedom still existed somewhere beyond the horizon. And then there were moments when she caught him doing the same alone in the darkness, glass of whiskey in hand, as if trying to drown memories that refused to die. She realized then that he was not just her captor. He was a prisoner too, shackled to a past that had left his heart shattered long before she ever arrived. One evening, she found him in the library, his shoulders tense as if carrying the weight of the entire world. For the first time, he looked less like a ruthless billionaire and more like a man consumed by his own demons. She hesitated, watching silently from the doorway. "What do you want?" His voice was sharp, though it carried the edge of fatigue. "Freedom," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. He gave a hollow laugh, one that chilled her bones. "Freedom doesn't exist, not for people like us." The words struck her harder than she expected. She should have walked away, but something in the brokenness of his tone held her still. He wasn't just cruel for the sake of cruelty. He was wounded, bound to ghosts she couldn't yet see. Lying awake that night, she hated the confusion growing inside her. She despised him for the marriage he forced upon her, for every moment he turned her dreams into chains. Yet her heart betrayed her, racing whenever she recalled the sorrow in his eyes, the cracks in his carefully built armor. She thought the battle was only about survival. But the war was slowly shifting towards something she couldn't explain. Her heart was betraying her. The mornings in the mansion were filled with silence sharper than knives. The maids whispered when they thought she wasn't listening, and the butlers bowed too low, as if afraid to breathe in front of their master. Every corner of the house reminded her of her captivity, yet something about his presence made the silence feel heavier. He would sit at the breakfast table, sipping coffee like it was armor, eyes hidden behind the newspaper, speaking only when necessary. She hated that she noticed how tired his hands looked, as though he hadn't known rest in years. Days turned into weeks, and though she despised him, her heart was forced to witness fragments of his humanity. Once she found him in the garden late at night, staring at the roses with a look so distant it seemed like he was somewhere else, perhaps in a memory too painful to share. When their eyes met, he looked startled, almost caught, before quickly turning cold again. But for her, that single moment was enough to ignite questions she didn't want to ask. Who was he before he became this ruthless billionaire? What had broken him so badly that he thought love was weakness and control was the only way to survive? Her resistance continued, though it grew complicated with every glimpse of his scars. She would challenge him during dinners, refusing to lower her gaze. She would storm out of conversations, leaving him in silence. Yet instead of punishing her, he watched her with something unspoken in his eyes, something that was not anger, not hatred, but something far more dangerous. One stormy evening, lightning cracked across the sky, and the mansion trembled under the roar of thunder. She stood by the window, hugging herself against the chill. He entered without a word, his presence filling the room like a shadow. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The storm outside raged as though mirroring the chaos inside their hearts. Why do you hate me so much? His voice was low, almost vulnerable. She spun around, disbelief flashing across her face. You forced me into this marriage. You stole my life, my freedom. What answer are you expecting? His jaw tightened, but his eyes looked like shattered glass. Because if I hadn't... He stopped, the words dying on his tongue, his fists clenching as though holding back something he couldn't reveal. Her breath caught. There was a story buried inside him, a secret tied to the reason he chained her to his side. She should have demanded answers, but his pain disarmed her. Instead, she whispered, "Because if you hadn't what?" He turned away, walking toward the door, his voice barely audible. You wouldn't understand. That night, she couldn't sleep. His words echoed in her mind, along with the way his voice cracked, the way his shoulders had seemed heavier than the world itself. For the first time, she realized her hatred was shifting. It wasn't vanishing, but it was no longer pure. It was tangled with something new, something dangerous curiosity. The next day, she tried to bury the confusion beneath anger again. She told herself she would never forgive him, that she would never care about a man who turned her life into chains. But her heart betrayed her with every glance, every silence that felt less like hostility and more like longing. One evening, as she wandered through the vast halls, she stumbled upon a locked door, different from the others, older, darker, as if it held memories instead of possessions. She reached for the handle, only to hear his footsteps behind her. His voice was sharp, laced with panic. "Don't go in there." She froze, turning to face him. For the first time, she saw fear in his eyes, not of her, but of what lay behind that door. "What's in there?" she asked softly. "Nothing you need to know," he said quickly, too quickly. But the way his voice faltered told her everything. It wasn't nothing, was everything. That night, as she lay awake in the dark, she realized the truth. The man who forced her into marriage wasn't just a tyrant. He was hiding a story, a wound so deep it shaped the monster he had become. And though she tried to deny it, part of her heart longed to uncover it, to see the man behind the mask. She wanted to believe she could keep hating him, but every secret he hid pulled her closer to the man he didn't want the world to see. The mansion had grown colder, not because of the weather, but because of the silence between them. After the night she had stood before the locked door, everything changed. He avoided her more than ever, keeping his distance, as if afraid she might uncover what he had buried. And yet the distance only made her curiosity stronger. She couldn't stop thinking about the fear in his eyes, the tremor in his voice, the way he had looked at her like she was standing too close to the one thing he swore to keep hidden. Days blurred into each other. She moved through endless corridors, her mind restless, her heart unsettled. Sometimes she caught him watching her, but whenever their eyes met, he turned away quickly, as if ashamed of being caught. He was a man at war with himself, and the battlefield was his own soul. One evening, she gathered enough courage to confront him. She found him in his study, the glow of a single lamp casting shadows across his face. He looked exhausted, lines of sorrow etched deeper than she had ever noticed before. "Why do you keep running from me?" she demanded, her voice trembling with frustration. His eyes lifted to hers, guarded yet vulnerable. "'Cause if you get too close, you'll see the truth. Once you do, you'll never forgive me." Her chest tightened at his words. "You've already stolen my freedom. What truth could be worse than that?" He stood, pacing across the room, as though the walls themselves were pressing against him. His hands shook slightly when he finally spoke. "Love destroys people. It weakens them. Ruined everything I once had. That's why I swore I'd never let it near me again." She listened, her anger softening into something unfamiliar. His confession wasn't just bitterness, it was grief. But grief over what? A lost love? A betrayal? A wound so deep it had turned him into the man who had caged her? She didn't know, but the shadows in his eyes begged her to understand. That night, she dreamed of the locked door again. In her dream, she opened it and found not darkness, but fragments of his past pictures of a girl with a gentle smile, laughter frozen in frames, and then fire, destruction, loss. She woke with tears on her cheeks, shaken by the realization that his cruelty was built on ashes. The next day, she tried to ignore the pull of the mystery, but fate had other plans. She was passing the library when she overheard two of the older servants whispering. They spoke of tragedy, of how he hadn't been the same since that night, of how love had once destroyed him. Her heart raced. She wanted to ask them more, but their fearful glances silenced her. Even they were too afraid to speak the truth. Later that evening, she found him on the balcony, the city lights painting his face in gold and shadow. She joined him, the air heavy with unspoken words. For a long moment, they just stood there, strangers bound by vows neither of them wanted. Finally, she whispered, "What happened to you?" His shoulders stiffened. "Don't ask questions you're not ready to hear the answers to." "But I am ready," she pressed, her voice breaking with sincerity. I need to know the man I married, the real man, not the mask you wear." He turned toward her, his gaze burning with a mix of anger and despair. "The real man died years ago. All that's left is what you see now." Her breath caught in her throat. She should have walked away, should have hated him all over again for shutting her out. But instead she found herself whispering, "Then let me find him. Let me see what you're hiding." He looked at her as though she were a storm he didn't know how to survive. For a heartbeat, she thought he might let her in. that he might unlock the chains he carried. But then his walls slammed back into place. He turned away, leaving her with nothing but silence and the ache of her own unanswered questions. That night, lying in the darkness, she realized her hatred was no longer hatred. It was something far more dangerous. It was the beginning of love. A love she didn't want. A love she didn't ask for. A love born not from choice, but from the cracks in his broken heart. Sometimes love is not found in freedom, but in the courage to heal the wounds that chains were meant to hide. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside her heart. Rain lashed against the windows as she wandered through the dark hallways of the mansion. Sleep had abandoned her, replaced by an ache to understand him. She had married a stranger who had stolen her choices. Yet every day she lived with him, she discovered pieces of a man who was far more than the monster he pretended to be. That night, fate pulled her again toward the locked door. The storm had tripped the electricity, and for the first time, the hallway stood in silence, unguarded. She touched the door handle, expecting resistance, but it turned easily in her hand. The lock had been forgotten, or perhaps he had left it open, daring her to face what lay inside. The room was a shrine to his past. Photographs lined the walls of a woman with gentle eyes and a radiant smile. Letters yellowed with age sat unopened on the desk. A wedding dress, untouched and wrapped in glass, stood in the corner like a ghost. And then she saw it, a newspaper clipping, its headline screaming of tragedy. Billionaire heiress dies in mysterious fire. Her breath caught. This was the love he had lost. The woman he had once given his heart to had been taken from him in flames. The empire he ruled, the walls he built, the cruelty he wore like armor, it was all born from that night. His broken heart was not just metaphorical, it was carved from grief and guilt that never healed. Her tears blurred the images, but when she turned, she found him standing in the doorway. His eyes were darker than the storm, his face pale with fury and fear. "You weren't supposed to see this?" he growled, his voice trembling. "Why?" she whispered, her heart breaking for him. "Why hide her? Why bury the man you were with her memory?" "Because she died because of me," he shouted, the confession ripping out of him like a wound torn open. "I couldn't save her. I had everything: money, power, the world at my feet, but I couldn't save the one person I loved. And now, I don't deserve love. I don't deserve anything but this emptiness." Her heart ached. For the first time, she saw not the billionaire who had forced her into marriage, but the shattered man who had punished himself for years. Slowly, she stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. "You're wrong. You don't heal by destroying others. You heal by letting someone stand with you in the pain. You think love killed you? But it's the only thing that can bring you back to life." His eyes burned, torn between rage and longing. "And what about you? I stole your freedom. I forced you into this cage. How can you say those words to me? Because even in chains, my heart can choose," she whispered. "And it chooses you, not the man you pretend to be, but the man you're afraid to let me see." Silence filled the room, broken only by the storm outside. He trembled, his mask cracking as tears he had long buried finally escaped. When she reached for his hand, he didn't pull away. For the first time, he let someone touch the scars he had hidden for years. The days that followed were different. The mansion that had once felt like a prison began to breathe with life again. They shared meals in silence that slowly grew into conversations. He no longer drowned himself in whiskey at night, but allowed her presence to anchor him. She, in turn, no longer dreamed of escape, but of building something new out of the ashes of their broken beginnings. Their love was not perfect. It was scarred, fragile, stitched together with threads of pain and forgiveness. But it was real. And in its imperfection lay its beauty. On a quiet evening, as they stood on the balcony watching the sunset, he whispered, "I never believed love could exist for me again, but you proved me wrong." She smiled softly, her hand in his. Love doesn't ask for perfection. It only asks for honesty. And finally, you've given me that. For the first time since their forced marriage, she didn't feel like his prisoner. She felt like his partner. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a man haunted by loss, but a man learning to love again. Because sometimes, the cruelest beginnings lead to the most unexpected forever.